Shalom, I'm Brad Scott with the Wild Branch Ministry, and I just want to take this time again to thank you for supporting the Hebrew Roots Network and everything that's going on here. As you see these programs, you see all the equipment around here, and obviously people have to run that equipment, and all the day-to-day activities here don't cease ever, and so they keep going. And so I encourage you, for those of you who can support us or support this ministry with $50 a month, Gideon's Army, you become part of an army that gets all these benefits later. Like it enters you into a context in which you can get on the space shuttle. I don't know if you know that, but those who are part of this have an opportunity to get on the space shuttle and fly into outer space. And so if that interests you at all, I encourage you, between that and supporting all the day-to-day activities here, God will bless you no matter where you go in outer space. Shalom.
Hi, I'm Chris Knight with Love for Yeshua Ministries. Thank you for tuning in today to watch the show. I'm a teacher from Southern California. I teach at the Oasis Life Center in Lancaster, and I work a lot with the youth around the country. I teach at several youth camps, go to various congregations, and I lead the youth at our local congregation. And I'm going to be doing a show here on the Hebraic Roots Network regarding the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, and looking at what that means, looking at how that's lived. And so thank you for joining us. It's going to be a 12-part series on the spirit of the Torah versus the letter of the Torah. So we're going to start out by asking, what really is the spirit of the law? Well, I'm going to start with Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 and 3, where we see a particular verse about how we should live and what Torah should mean to us. In Deuteronomy 8, verses 2 through 3, we see this. And it says, "And you shall remember that Yahweh your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, he allowed you to hunger, and he fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that departs from the mouth of God." How many of you have heard this verse before? It's a very famous verse. I've heard it quoted several times. It's one of the verses Yeshua used in the wilderness when he was being tempted by the adversary. But what if I told you it didn't actually say, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that departs from the mouth of God? When we look in the Hebrew, we see that it actually says, Al kol motza fi Yahweh yichyeh ha'adam. Okay? Which means that on everything that comes forth, on everything that emanates from God's mouth shall man live. Well, then the question will be, well, Chris, what else comes forth from God's mouth but words? And I want you to go, whew, breath. Breath comes forth from the mouth. And what is the Hebrew word for breath? Ruach. The same Hebrew word for spirit. And so we see here in Deuteronomy 8 that he actually says man shouldn't live just on food, just on bread, but by everything that comes forth from God's mouth, both his word and his spirit. And so what does it mean to truly live by both his word and his spirit? The Torah is actually a spiritual document. And we see this in the book of Romans chapter 7 verse 14. Paul teaches that the Torah is spiritual, and he says, "For we know that the Torah is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin." We see this concept also in the book of Proverbs, when we look at chapter 6 and verse 23. And it says, "For a commandment is a lamp, and the Torah is light." So what's the difference between the Torah and the commandments, between the spirit of the Torah and the letter of the Torah, between a light and a lamp? Well, you can have a lamp with no light, okay? But you need a lamp to shine light. You need some sort of vessel in which you're going to shine light. Okay, and so the Torah would be the light. The commandment is the lamp. The commandment is the physical manifestation in this world through which you can express the Torah. the heart of God. The rabbis put it in an interesting way. They said the commandments are like limbs, and the Torah is like the blood that flows through the limbs. Now, if you had a bunch of limbs and no blood, it's pointless, it's lifeless, it's useless. But likewise, you can't just have a big bucket of blood and no limbs. You need both. And so we're going to see what it means to have both, what it means to live in the Torah and in the commandment, in both the letter and the spirit. And so we're going to look at this in both the Old and New Covenant, see what the difference is, and see how the spirit of the Torah comes into play. So we're going to start with the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai with Moses and the children of Israel. And so we're going to go to Exodus chapter 20, verses 18 through 20. So what does it mean, the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law? What does it look like to be living in the letter or the spirit? Well, let me give you a practical example that hopefully I think a lot of you will be able to relate to. I know that I went through it as a kid. How many times have you been driving down, you have your kids in the back seat, okay, and one of them starts poking the other? And eventually you hear the bickering, you hear some fighting, you say, hey, stop poking your brother, okay? And you have silence, you have quiet for maybe about 30 more seconds. But then they're going to start fighting and bickering again. You say, hey, I thought I told you to stop poking your brother. And well, they say, but Mom, I'm not poking him. You know, I'm hitting him, or I'm elbowing him, or I'm, wiping boogers on his face, okay? I've done this several times with my siblings. They've done it to me. And I think it's a beautiful example of the difference between the spirit and the letter. Because technically, they weren't poking their brother anymore. But were they really obeying what you told them to do? Of course not. You wanted them to stop bugging, stop pestering their sibling. But they took it by the strict literal meaning, the strict letter. And there really are two ways we can come to a Torah-observant lifestyle. We can view it as a checklist of do's and don'ts and just abide by the literal commandment. And when we do it that way, we can find a lot of loopholes. And we can adapt it to our lifestyle. And we can make it fit our personality or our needs very easily. But the other way is to look at the meaning and the purpose behind the Torah and behind the commandments. To do that, we need to wake up every day and say, Father, truly teach me how to walk after your ways, your commandments. What is your heart in this? What are you trying to show me and teach me in this? And go beyond just the letter. So we're not like the kid in the back seat poking his brother. So we're going to start by taking a look at the covenant at Mount Sinai as compared to the new covenant we have in Yeshua, and what the differences are, okay, and what is the same in both of them. And we're going to see a little bit more about the spirit versus letter, what the solution is, and how we're going to start the series off. So if we begin by going to Exodus chapter 20, verses 18 through 21, it says this, Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. And they said to Moses, You speak with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that his fear might be before you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. So this was right after Yahweh had just spoken the 10 statements to all the children of Israel there at the base of Mount Sinai. Everyone heard Yahweh's voice audibly. What a beautiful, amazing day that would have been. But what happens? We had fear. We were afraid. And we didn't want to hear the voice of our king anymore. We didn't want to hear the voice of our God. So we send Moses to go hear it for us and bring it back to us. Moses says, don't fear, but what do we end up doing? We stand afar off. We didn't want to hear. And we read throughout the prophets that we had stony hearts. It was because of our stoniness of heart that we didn't want to hear the voice of God. Do you guys remember the parable of the sower, where he talks about he's sowing seed on different types of soil? Okay, and we know that the seed is the word, as Brad Scott always loves to point out in many of his teachings. And some of the seed fell on rocky soil. And that was a picture of the stony hearts. And at first it grew, it prospered, the plant was doing fine. But as soon as the first trial came up, it withered and it fell away. Well, we see this with the children of Israel. We have the Mount Sinai event, okay? And in Exodus chapter 24, verses 6 and 7, we accept it. Okay, and we accept it with joy and with gladness. And we see that we took to it, okay, with a smile on our faces. It says, and Moses took half the blood, put it in the basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that Yahweh has said we will do, and we will hear. Na'aseh v'nishma. And we accepted the covenant. In fact, we said I do 3 times when we first received the covenant at Mount Sinai. And we rejoiced and we praised him. But remember, when we stood at the base of the mountain, we stood from afar off. And we didn't want to hear his voice. Well, the very next instance we read about the children of Israel, because after Mount Sinai, we're going to have a lot of the laws regarding the tabernacle, the Mishkan that was given to Moses. But the very next time we see the children of Israel, we already are stumbling. We already are breaking the covenant because of our hardness of hearts, because we stood from afar off, because we didn't want to hear the voice of our God. And so we see in Exodus 32, the next time we look at the children of Israel from that day, it says, now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us out from the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. So the very first trial we have, where's Moses? What's going on? We stumble and we already make an image. We already make for ourselves an idol, and we fall and we slip up in the covenant. And I believe it's because we stood from afar off. I believe it's because we had stony hearts and we didn't want to hear the voice of our God. So what's the solution? How do we get it out of the mess that we are in, of not wanting to hear his words, of having that stoniness of heart? Well, Yahweh gives us the solution in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 19. And Moses says this to the children of Israel. He said, Yahweh your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him shall you hear. And according to all, it is according to all you desired of Yahweh your God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not again hear the voice of Yahweh my God, nor let me see this great fire any more, lest I die. And Yahweh said to me, what they have spoken is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak them all that I command him. And it shall be that whomever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require it of him. So on that day, when we made covenant with Yahweh our God at the base of Mount Sinai, and we stood afar off, he said, what they have said is good. Them not hearing my voice anymore, lest they die, that is good. But what's the solution? Not Moses. Moses was our mediator temporary, but he says the solution is, I will raise up a prophet like you, Moses, and he will speak my words to them, and they shall hear the words that I put in his mouth, and they will heed him. This is Yeshua, as you very well may know. And we see evidence for this in John chapter 14, verses 8 through 11. And Philip said to him, speaking of Yeshua, Lord, show us the Father, and it will be sufficient for us. But Yeshua says to him, have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father? The words that I speak to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does the works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and that the Father is in me, or else believe me for the sake of the works themselves. So we see that Yeshua is the fulfillment of what Yahweh spoke to the children of Israel in Deuteronomy. Yeshua is the prophet like Moses. And since we couldn't hear the voice of our God from the mountain, since we had to separate ourselves and stand from afar off, we see the Father in Yeshua. We hear his words in Yeshua. And so Yeshua is the mediator. Yeshua is the one who brings the Father to us. And when we hear his words, we hear the Father's words. When we obey his voice, we obey the Father's voice. And so he brings a solution to us wanting to stand afar off and not truly hear the breath, the ruach of our God, but only live by the letter. Why is this important? Okay, maybe the children of Israel stumbled once at the foot of Mount Sinai when we see the incidents with the golden calf. But we actually see it happening time and time again, and that it was necessary that God make this new covenant through Yeshua with us. And I want to look at an example, okay, of Yahweh bringing a rebuke against us, against the children of Israel. Okay, and it's in the book of Isaiah. It's chapter 1, and Isaiah is speaking against Israel. Okay, and he compares them to Sodom and Gomorrah. And let's just look at what the text says. In Isaiah chapter 1, starting with verse 10, it says this: "Hear the word of Yahweh, O chiefs of Sodom. Give ear to the Torah of our God, O people of Gomorrah. Why do I need your numerous sacrifices, says Yahweh? I am sated with elevation offerings of rams and the fat of fatlings, the blood of bulls, sheep, and goats I do not desire. When you come to appear before me, who sought this from your hand to trample my courts? Bring your worthless meal offerings no longer. It is incense of abomination to me. As for the new moon, the Sabbath, and your calling of convocations, I cannot abide mendacity with solemn assembly. My soul detests your new moons and your appointed times, and they have become a burden upon me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even if you were to intensify your prayer, I will not listen. Your hands are repleted with blood. Wash yourselves, purify yourselves, remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease doing evil, learn to do good. Seek justice, vindicate the victim, render justice to the orphan, take up the grievance of the widow. Come now, let us reason together, says Yahweh. If your sins are like scarlet, they will become white as snow. And if they have become red as crimson, they will become white as wool. And so we see that Isaiah brings this heavy rebuke against the children of Israel. And at first, one might come to the conclusion that he's speaking against the Torah. And a lot of Christians might use this verse to speak against the Torah. But notice he says, your Sabbaths, your new moons, your assemblies, I hate, I detest, I can't stand. Yet in Leviticus 23, we know that he calls them what? My Sabbaths, my festivals, my convocations, my new moons. These are mine, says Yahweh. But in Isaiah, he said they were yours. Because notice, although they were keeping the Sabbaths, the new moon festivals, although they were bringing the offerings, they weren't doing justice in the land. They weren't looking out for the orphan or the widow. They weren't seeking justice. Instead, they were doing evil. They were trampling on their brother. They weren't truly fulfilling the function of the Torah, the spirit of the Torah. And even though they might have been doing it, kosher, all 100% according to the checklist, once again, going back to the child in the backseat of the car poking their brother, they were able to find a loophole, And what they ended up doing was trampling on their brother and one another. When really the purpose of Torah is to be a light to your family, to your community, to the nation of Israel, and to the nations of the world. Israel was to be the example of godly living, of who Yahweh is in the earth to the rest of the nations of the world. But that's not what happened. And we fell and we stumbled from that. And so there was need for a change, once again going back to Yeshua, bridging the gap, and being the solution to the problem of us standing far off. And so we see this in the New Covenant. And as many of you are very familiar with and probably already know, the New Covenant we find in two places in the Scripture. In Jeremiah chapter 31, and then we see it quoted again in Hebrews 8. So I'm going to be reading from Hebrews 8, verses 7 through 10, where it says this: For if the first covenant had been faultless, then no place would have been sought for a second. But because finding fault with them, he says, Behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them, says Yahweh. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahweh. I will put my Torah in their mind and write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. So we see that the difference and the solution in the new covenant is that he's going to do a change and a work in us. He's going to change our hearts and change our minds. No longer will we have the stony hearts that want to stand afar off and not hear the voice of our God, but say, Moses, you go and bring it back to us. But in Messiah Yeshua and in the new covenant, we now are brought near, and we now come near. And we have a change of heart, we have a change of mind. And as we'll see in the next episode, Yahweh says He'll put His own very Spirit within us to allow us to walk in His commandments, to keep His ways. A lot of times we hear from mainstream Christian circles that the difference between the Old Covenant and New Covenant is that, in the Torah we have all these commandments, we have all these laws that we can never live up to, we can never keep. We can't keep that standard. It's too holy because we're all sinful. And so what God does is He brings Himself down. He brings His standards down to our level. But what we really see here in Hebrews chapter 8 is by Yahweh changing our hearts, our minds, and putting His Spirit within us, He brings us up to Him, not the other way around. God didn't decide that He was too holy, so He needed to be less holy so we could fit in. He decided that He was going to do a work and a changing in our hearts so that we no longer had to stand afar off. We see this in Ezekiel 36, 24 through 27, where it says, "For I will take you from among the nations. I will gather you out from all the countries and bring you into your own land. And then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness and from all your idols. And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will keep my judgments and do them." So He puts His Spirit within us so that we will keep His commandments, His statutes, His ways. But it's only by Him putting His Spirit within us so we will walk in the spirit of the Torah and not just the letter. So please, I would encourage you to stay with us for this series as we're going to be looking at the spirit of the Torah versus the letter of the Torah, what that means, okay, in both the New and the Old Covenant. And we're going to take a look at each one of the fruits of the Spirit. Well, why is that important? Well, if the solution, okay, to us being afar off from God, for us being separated from our King, was our stony hearts, and that was what was keeping us, and the solution is Yeshua bringing us near by putting His Spirit within us, well, then the question is, what is the evidence that His Spirit is within us? And Paul teaches about the fruits of the Spirit. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is if the Spirit of Yahweh is truly in you and you're walking in the Torah and you're walking in this new covenant, these are the things you should be seeing in your life. You should be seeing your fruits as you live out this walk of Torah. And so we're going to take a look and see, well, what truly are the fruits of having the Spirit of Yahweh within us? We're going to take a look at Galatians chapter 5 where it says the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And we're going to see each one of those in the Torah. And we're going to see each one of those throughout the Scriptures and how those should be applied in our obedience to the commandments and in our walk of Torah, in our lifestyle of Torah, because we should be seeing those fruits in our lives. Just like if we have the seed, which is the Word, in us, the fruit is the obedience to the commandments. Well, if we have the Spirit of Yahweh within us, the fruits are going to be these fruits of the Spirit. So join us for the rest of the series as we take a look at the fruits of the Spirit.
Shalom, I'm Ryan White, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the Joshua Generation Show on Hebraic Roots Network. Help us spread the Word of God to all the nations. You can check us out on the schedule at HebraicRootsNetwork.com to see when our episodes are airing, or you can check us out on demand anytime on the web at HebraicRootsNetwork.com, or on your Roku device on your television. You can check us out as well on demand anytime from the comfort of your own living room. I hope to see you there.